I worked for a number of years as an environmental coordinator for several companies. In that position, I was responsible for threading a path through the myriad laws and regulations created to manage the way a company was to create, use, and dispose of various materials. The rules didn't apply to just hazardous materials, but everything that entered and left the manufacturing process. In 1965, when I first got involved in the environmental movement, I was confused by the discrepancies in the regulations. Certain products were considered innocuous and had virtually no restrictions on their use, while others were banned. In 1969, I started working at the Midwest Foundry. The foundry used coke, limestone, steel, and iron to make gray iron, semi-steel, and stainless steel castings. All those materials were dug from the earth, combined in various ways to make the items needed for the modern world. These could be considered primary feedstock for the process. The waste stream was made up of all the materials that were used in the manufacturing process. Burning fuel created nitrous oxides, carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, and a host of other chemicals that exited the blast furnace stack. The limestone that entered the furnace combined with the various oxides, rust, and dirt that were trace elements in the iron and became slag. The slag was a glassy material similar to obsidian rock. The slag was captured in a basin, and when it had cooled, was moved to a landfill. At the same time, the process created sand mixed with coal dust and bentonite clay that was used to make molds. The molding sand would become unusable due to breaking down of the grains from the tremendous heat generated in the process of containing molten iron alloys, and was replenished with an admixture of new clay, sand, and coal dust. The worn-out sand was hauled off to a landfill. The refractory materials that lined the blast furnace and ladles used to transport the molten iron were made from clay mixed with cement or burnt limestone, alumina or aluminum oxide, asbestos, and sand. The refractory would decompose under the fierce heat and need to be removed and replaced. The removed materials were also taken to landfills. During the time the foundry and others like it were operating, untold tons of material were generated and found their way to local landfills. Landfills were typically in areas that were too wet to be used productively or were eroded to gullies or sinkholes. Whole sections of our town were built on the landfills that created flat, stable ground from swamps. The banks of the local river and lakes were lined with the waste material from foundries and household waste from the families supported by the foundry and other local businesses. The EPA began to require that certain materials be treated as hazardous. At first, the list was rather short. Gasoline and oils were flammable and needed to be treated with care. Oil-based paint, acid, explosive material like phosphate and gases were also considered hazardous. Regulations were created to control the transport, use, and disposal of these organic materials. As time went on, more and more materials fell under the listing of hazardous. In my opinion, the EPA became more and more powerful because there was no oversight of their operation. They were considered to be beyond reproach because everything they did was based on saving the environment. Clean air, clean water, clean food were all things that no one in their right minds would object to. But who defined what was clean? The laws were written given the EPA regulatory powers. The regulations were written in an open-ended style. Clean was defined as not containing contaminants above detectable limits. Detectable limits. Let's just think on that for a minute. As I look across my living room and out the window, the air I'm looking through is clean. I can't see any contaminants. It doesn't burn my eyes. It doesn't have any odors. It's clean. If I were to take a sample of the air and send it off to a laboratory for testing, they would surely find that it contains carbon dioxide. My dog and I are in the room and breathing. They would find dust. Short of a NASA clean room, every room has dust floating in the air. They would find ozone from the minute electrical arcs created by using a light switch or vacuum cleaner. There would be minute traces of every mineral or chemical that entered the room at any time in its existence. Paint, carpet, wax, oil, hairspray, furniture, glue, all would be present. Thanks to modern detection methods, a great many things that were present but undetectable are now detectable. The EPA has control of all of those materials. Without any oversight, they are able to determine what is an acceptable level of anything based on detectable limits. All they need to do is find some way to suggest that a material is dangerous and needs to be regulated. Since dust in the right concentrations can be explosive, it is regulated. Methane is a natural byproduct of life. It is now considered a greenhouse gas. Before someone coined the phrase greenhouse gas, methane was okay. It was the swamp gas that bubbled up when you poked in the riverbed. It was the funny sound that your uncle made and caused your mom to roll her eyes. If you think of organic as that which comes from an organism, then everything you and every other plant, bird, fish, insect, animal respires, excretes, or sheds is an organic. According to the EPA, organics are considered hazardous because they are potentially hazardous in the right concentrations. Carbon dioxide, or CO2, is considered a greenhouse gas. It is regulated. Wait a minute, why is a natural byproduct of breathing considered hazardous? How is it to be regulated? The EPA has followed the boiling a frog method. If you drop a frog into boiling water, it will hop out. To boil a frog, you start with a frog in a bath of warm water in a pot. Then heat the water. The CO2 regulations apply to industry. Each operation has to stay within a limit set by a complicated formula involving the overall output of an area. If you are creating CO2 by burning tires, but not over the limit, you're okay. If another operation were to try and start next to your plant and they release CO2 while filling fire extinguishers, they would be blocked from operating because they would cause the area to exceed the limit. But if they were to donate to an environmental group that is pumping CO2 into deep wells and sequestering it, then they would be cleared to go because the net result is the lowering of CO2 in the global environment. Where am I going with this? In my opinion, as soon as the EPA became a money-making operation, the original design became clear. If I set out to build a house, I stop when the house is complete. Then I build another house and so on. When the EPA has regulated a process, it doesn't stop. It uses its power to regulate to insert itself into more and more facets of life until it controls the air you breathe and the food you eat. In 1993, I worked for Metal Powder Components. As part of my duties, I made sure all the MSDS sheets were filled out correctly, and I was the liaison between the plant where I worked and the local EPA inspector. We worked together for several years and became friends. One day we were trying to figure out how to record the MSDS sheet for some of the materials being used in the plant. My friend, the inspector, asked if I knew that there were no material safety data sheets for ketchup. He said it was an effort to avoid having to call it hazardous because of the acid in the vinegar. You could find MSDS sheets for vinegar, but not ketchup. The same thing goes for most foodstuffs. The EPA never sleeps. It is precedent-based. Once something has happened, they set up a way to regulate it. I just recently looked up the MSDS sheet for ketchup. There it was. Someone figured out that it required a way to make, store, and use and dispose of ketchup. I'll put a link to it in the description. The funny part is the MSDS sheets have all been filled out by someone like me. They might be trained, or they may just be an intern. Give it a task so the MSDS sheet book is always up to date. Once it is written and reported, it is there forever. Here's the treatment for ingestion of ketchup. DB5557 ketchup red. Ingestion. Wash out mouth with water. Remove victim to fresh air and keep it rest in a position comfortable for breathing. If material has been swallowed and the exposed person is conscious, give small quantities of water to drink. Do not induce vomiting unless directed to do so by medical personnel. Get medical attention if symptoms occur. So next time you're at McDonald's and you're eating your French fries, don't be surprised if somebody comes running in, grabs you, hauls you outside, washes out your mouth with water, and puts you on a gurney to haul off for testing.
This video is not to be viewed by anyone under the age of 13 in the U.S. or 16 in the European Union without the express written permission of the parents or the legal guardians of the underage person. Such written permission must be on file at the local government entity in charge of enforcing the rules and regulations established by the FTC. Anyone violating these terms is admitting by default that they hold harmless the owners and operators of this channel. Any and all questions should be addressed to your local branch of the FTC.